Okay, in this step, we are going to customize our labels a little bit. So I showed you earlier that we use the field POI name. There's also a field called population. I'm not that familiar with this file. I'd be curious if truly all these are zero populations, but nevertheless, there is this field where there's a population of 1,000 in one township, all the way up to 8,000. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the townships that are above 1,000 people. We're going to make the text a little bit larger. Oftentimes you'll see maps that have this hierarchy of labels, and larger places that are larger cities and towns oftentimes have larger text, and then smaller towns will have smaller text. And when I talk about the size of text, I'm talking about the font size. So in order to do that, we need to set up a custom labeling. So we could go back into labeling. And what you need to do, instead of single labels, which treats every single label the same, we need to go to rule-based labeling. Okay, so with rule-based labeling, what we're going to do is we're going to have two rules, one for greater than 1,000 and one for less than 1,000. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to word wrap them so that they're not so long, so that there's like sort of a return after a word. So I'll show you how to do both of those right now. So for the first one, what we'll do is for the filter, we're going to make this, so what you could do is you essentially can click this little symbol here and do filter. So filter population less than 1,000. And then where the value is what you're actually mapping. What we're going to do there is we're going to put a little customized function there, and usually you can write these in here. So I've already have this, so it's going to be called word wrap PO name, and it's going to wrap it after the second, at the start of the second word. So let me do that. So less than 1,000. I'm gonna hit OK. We're gonna hit OK, and let's see what we got. Okay, so there's one thing we have to fix. Where I had this pasted in the first time, I had the word filter. That was just for me to remember in my notes, but this filter word does not need to be there. You're just writing a statement that population less than 1,000. So we're going to hit apply. We're going to hit OK. And now if we take a look at it, you can see that Alloway Junction has now, instead of being straight across, it has a carriage return there after the word. So you can see how that has happened. You can also see how some of them aren't labeled now, because the only things that are labeled now are those that are less than 1,000. So I believe what we can do is just copy this rule and paste it, and then all we have to do is go into one of the rules and change this sign to greater than 1,000, and then we can hit apply. And now everything is labeled. So what I do sometimes is, not sometimes, but you want to make sure you've actually queried out the right one. So what I'm going to do here is, if your font is an Arial, change it to Arial. And you're also going to make it bold. And we're going to make this, let's just go with a 10 for this one, and then we'll go for a 7 or 8 for the smaller towns. So those that are less than 1,000. So here's where you're going to be able to see some of the differences happening. So you see how it made those bold and the rest stayed the same. I still think that might be a little large for this, like what I'm looking at on this particular map. The thing about lettering is you oftentimes have to keep going back and forth until you'll get a sense of what looks good eventually with letter hierarchy. You do want to plan it. So like I'm going to go with a 9 for the larger towns and probably a 7 for the smaller towns, and I'm not going to make them bold. Okay, so now if we do the other one, I'm going to make sure this is Arial, and then I'm going to turn these into a 7, and it's not going to be bolded. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, hit OK. There you can see that. My thinking right off the bat is that the 7 is a little small. So since we made the other one bold at a 9, I think what I'm going to do is make this an 8. I've just done this for a while that I kind of have a sense. But eventually you'll have a good sense, and many of you may already have that feeling. Okay, so there we go. So the next thing that you can do to customize the labels even a little bit more, which really makes them kind of pop, is you can go into let's see, you'll have to do this for both of them separately, but what we can do is there's like this buffering around the letter. So we'll talk about buffering versus mask, but you can draw a buffer around it, and usually, it's going to be white, right? Let's just see what it looks like first. Right, you see how that it kind of looks like sometimes you see in Google with that like white background, right? All of a sudden now it looks more familiar, that like the way that we see it on the web, right? I don't know if I would say it looks more professional, but it looks crisper. But what we want to do is still reduce that buffer a little bit. You can adjust the size here. We don't need it to be, and I'll talk about why you don't want to make it too buffered. So here's half of the amount, and let's see how this looks. That's probably a little bit better. So then we're going to apply that 0.5 white background buffer to the other one. So we go to buffer, draw buffer, do a 0.5, and let's see if it worked. Yeah, there you go. So it really changes how the map looks by just essentially putting that, and it allows the reader to more easily see, especially on maps where you have a lot of text. Some of you have commented on some of the maps that you critiqued or looked at, and you said, wow, there's so much lettering on there, but there are tricks. The thing is you were able to see all that lettering, right? You were able to read each letter. It wasn't like they put so much lettering on that it made it unreadable.